The usual suspects. Well, I'm looking in the chat room here. What has come through the news wires for you, Dr. Hill? What have you seen?
I've been noticing, aside from other stuff that you forwarded to the group to check out as topics, I've been noticing this topic about ADHD showing shortened lifespan, showing up here and there in my news feeds, and had a few folks. I being a neuroscientist, being a biohacker, being a neurofeedback person, when something happens that seems relevant, I get a news clipping forwarded virtually or physically from like this person and that person and my mother and my friend over there and this person I hadn't thought about in 20, like, oh, hey, wait, let me send this to Andrew. So the one that I've been getting recently is the shortened lifespan in ADHD. Yeah. So
what's the backing behind that, and what is the concept?
I think the concept is the same one that shows shortened lifespan in left-handedness, in that there's extra stress and extra like increased opportunities for poor choices and riskier behavior with impulsivity. Essentially, is I think for ADHD the takeaway, it's impulsivity driven, and I think it really is a sort of a psychosocial impact where you make riskier choices or seek stimuli or whatever, and have a different socioeconomic path and a different healthcare kind of path. So it ends up being that kind of impact, I think.
So it's not being tied to the medications, of course.
No, it's not an early death from Ritalin or something. No. It's not a stimulant phenomena. It's other
things.
Yeah,
right?
It's being impulsive means you're likely to race cars and crash stuff and have risky sex and make dumb ideas and get in fights. Right. So it's that kind of. I believe that's the through line there. So
is that college?
What's that?
Is that you just described college?
College. Well, right. College. Most college kids are below the age where their frontal lobes have finished cooking, right? Because that finishes out around 24, 25. So yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, college.
I thought 27. Where do I get 27 from?
I don't know. No, women about 23, 24, men about 24, 25 for full frontal development. And you really get most of your activation of the brain, most of the gas pedal kind of phenomena by about the late teens, mid to late teens even. And then from that last 10 years is mostly inhibitory interneurons. It's mostly additional fine tuning and braking and inhibition and signal clarification. So you can control the system as well as increase myelination. So it's not really more processing power after that like 15, 16-year-old range. From then on, it's like refining the process and getting control over it. But yeah, that means college kids have very little self-control often, and they're impulsive.
Where did I come up with the age of 27? Because I thought the age of 27 in professional sports, that is generally when all the athletes seem to peak. And also the age 27 is a lot of rock and rollers have died at the age of 27. Is there anything that's, playing? Hey, Anthony, long time no see, brother.
Man. Interesting topic. What are we talking about? Go on.
Like 2 years after their frontal lobe developed, we're talking about is it age 25, age 27, and why they're talking about the ADHD people's lifespan being shorter.
And this idea of disinhibition leading to riskier behavior and when that might stop, after college. But he was wondering what happens at 27. He's got this idea that there's a 27-year-old developmental life course stage, but I'm not sure.
Professional athletes, they peak at 27.
No, they do not. Wow, that makes
depends
sense.
on the sport, right?
Okay.
Fencers peak in their 40s, or they can.
Yeah. What about soccer or something like that?
Yeah.
Revenue generating sports.
That's funny. That's funny. But yeah, like Janis Joplin and Kurt Cobain or something, right? Was it?
They all did.
They all died around then.
Well, maybe for the musicians, it's maybe that's as long as you can get away with using hard drugs for. Before it like takes too much of a toll. 2, 3, 4 years. That's it. Like 5 years. That's it.
You burn it up. Yeah. Actually, maybe Dr. Hill or someone knows. You hear more these days about adult onset ADHD. Is that correlated with anything like a EEG phenotype that you see more commonly?
I think it's adult-defined ADHD,
Okay.
adult-discovered ADHD, adult
Okay.
revealed because of menopause ADHD or sleep issues.
Hmm.
Apnea interacting with ADHD reveals ADHD or jacks it up to 11. So does
Mm.
menopause. So I get a lot of middle-aged women who are like, I just got an ADHD diagnosis. What the heck? We're like, oh yeah, look at your brain, all that theta. Wow, yeah, and you have big sleep maintenance issues. Oh yes, I do. Oh, okay, progesterone dropping out, threw off your sleep maintenance, let your inattentive ADD blow up because it's the same tissue that manages that vigilance tone. So you get this exacerbation of these phenomena. But the phenotypes show up even before, but sometimes you can mask or just not get diagnosed until stress or fatigue or COVID or concussion,
But
destabilizes you.
there are, well, here's another disorder. I think they say that I think it might be bipolar, but also for sure schizophrenia. They say it won't show up until like the early 20s, I think I've heard. And I'm
24
wondering,
is that peak age for schizophrenia and bipolar 1. Yeah, the genetic variants of bipolar.
and I'm remembering now, a nurse in nurse practitioner school alerted me to this, that she's at UPenn, which I imagine is a good school, and their textbook, she showed me in her textbook, the writer of the textbook, he believes that bipolar and ADHD may have a similar
Oh, sure.
genetic overlap because they're both as heritable. They're like both very heritable. And something came out this week. It was posted everywhere that something like 8 or 9 psychiatric disorders come from the same 108 genes or something. So I'm wondering, well, even if you just maybe what might be causing bipolar or schizophrenia?
There are studies showing the same genetics produce bipolar 1 and schizophrenia. It's the same prodromal set of behaviors and resource change. And you'll get prodromal schizophrenia in unaffected siblings that then get bipolar phenomena. So it's the same genes, and that's been known for a while.
Wow.
And it's about the best understood psychiatric and medication response is the lithium schizophrenia kind of, and bipolar schizophrenia kind of. That's about the best psychiatrically understood intervention we have at a medication level is lithium bipolar. And so we understand how bipolar works pretty well, and we understand how schizophrenia works pretty well. We have very sophisticated drugs for it. And they're really similar, and you can think of them as variants, I think, of the same difficulty. And they're developmental disabilities in some ways too, because when you get a true schizophrenic, then you have I believe there's a phenomena with the radial glial guide cells. So you're not getting deposition of the 6 layers of the cortex organized properly necessarily. So that can produce these phenomena. And true schizophrenia or more what we think of as florid or active schizophrenia will often have a progressive component too, which doesn't always make sense. So does bipolar, though. It tends to cycle and then rapid cycle. So yeah, same genes, but bipolar 2, what frustrates me is the relabeling of buckets. And now they have bipolar 2 that they throw in somebody who's anxious, who has ADHD, who's a little bit has attachment issues, and they're away from home for the first time. They're a little depressed. Oh, bipolar 2. And that is very confusing for somebody who's like, I just got a bipolar diagnosis.
Yeah.
Really?
And
Wow.
anxiety and ADHD go hand in hand too. I see more and more people coming in, adult diagnosed ADHD, and you look in their brain maps, they've got definite patterns of anxiety as well. So no wonder you can't focus. So it's all kind of like intertwined.
And to that point, you have diagnostic labeling that doesn't necessarily match the phenotype. Anthony was asking about the phenotypes in adults. I see a fair amount. I have one particular psychiatrist that refers to me a lot out of Orange County, and he sent me 3-4 people, and he finally called me and said, hey, what's going on? I like 4 people in a row I've sent you with ADHD diagnoses. You look at their brain and tell them they don't have ADHD probably. What's going on? They don't want to stop their meds, but what's going on? I'm like, all right. And we were seeing anxiety and fatigue fighting each other, leaving them brittle, leaving them reactive. Yeah. And there's a certain section of people who you can use stimulants fairly effectively for sleep and circadian and energy. And, you even have some folks get anxiolytic effects from stimulants. So for that category, stimulants can be a useful adjunct or a useful, medication. Maybe we should answer Guy Soleil. Hey, Guy, nice to see you again. I saw a guy hanging out in the live stream a couple nights ago. Good question since we're talking about stimulants. Speaking of ADHD, will Adderall still be needed after neurofeedback? The literature says that you get better effects combined after neurofeedback. That's what the strict literature would say.
Interesting.
Mostly I see I see people needing to discontinue medication when they do neurofeedback because the medication starts to work too well, and then they don't like it, and then they back off, and they just keep backing off until it's gone. So usually you get permanent changes in executive function with neurofeedback. That's my perspective. I'm not sure the research literature backs that up.
I've seen more people reducing or eliminating the medication through the process of neurofeedback. A lot of them, that's their goal though, when they come to me too. So they have that ambition as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's a pretty effective target for neurofeedback is medication reduction when you're in that ADHD landscape and you're using stimulants.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and we one of the pieces that I find is central there is you get this, you guys can confirm this sensitization to stimulant medication a few weeks into doing SMR beta training. You get this, oh wow, my Adderall is working, you know, much too well or whatever. So that right there gives people a very direct experience instead of a, you know, labeled experience. It's not a diagnostic change or someone deciding. It's like, oh my gosh, this Adderall feels different. Okay.
What about the kids that are like studying for tests in college that are popping the Adderalls? Same thing.
In what way are they getting effects? Not great effects sometimes. I mean, when somebody's using unprescribed stimulants, they usually don't use them that well. They don't use them as prescribed. They typically use them for days at a time and then stop, and then use them days at a time again and then stop. And you end up with, you know, anxiety attacks and sleep disorders and, you know, short-term psychosis and things like that if you abuse
crashing.
Yeah.
Well, in colleges, that's the easiest drug you can get, isn't it? So if they're all popping it, I'm just wondering how does that help them study? And can you do neurofeedback to have like digital Adderall? If so, how
you can replace it. You can do enough neurofeedback so somebody can kick their brain into gear when they decide to, and then kick it out of gear when they decide to. So, I mean, you don't need the neurofeedback as a state shifter, but you can move you can change resources pretty reliably. College kids that come to me and want help, you know, you can do neurofeedback, but you can also recommend nootropics, which is a much safer way to go after boosting study skills and concentration. Things like citicoline and some of the other, you know, some of the omega-3s, some of the B vitamin cocktails, especially dialed into your own methylation. These things can make a significant subjective change in how well you can concentrate, sustain, learn, sleep, etc. So I think there's more there than there is in finding study drugs like stimulants. So
schizophrenics have smaller prefrontal cortexes, if I remember correctly. Makes sense. It would be related. ADHD.
Even 2, yeah. I don't think schizophrenia is related to ADHD. I don't think there's any real overlap there. There's definitely atypicality in brains, and they're both dopaminergic. But I'm not sure that there's a strong correlation. I could be wrong, but I don't think there's like a dramatically increased incidence of schizophrenia when you have ADHD.
I think you might be referring to the gene overlap that we were kind of discussing, or at least
schizophrenia and bipolar. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and maybe this is the muddiness. Bipolar 2, you'll get dumped into a bucket when it's really ADHD or really trauma or really OCD or really whatever and low-key stuff, and then it's called bipolar, but it's bipolar 2. So yeah, sorry, Radar Ashwood. Maybe that's the
Here's a good one that EEG could be useful for on that topic. A lot of times doctors, I've had friends go through this. Doctors don't know that they're bipolar until they give them an antidepressant, and then they have their first manic episode 3 months later, because in a bipolar person, antidepressants can trigger the cycling. And my nurse practitioner friend was telling me this evening, she said they taught her, she's in school right now, that bipolar people that are treated with that antidepressant, they are more likely to become treatment resistant afterwards, even when they're switched onto the correct meds. And they think so. My what I'm saying is potentially I know Jay says there's EEG phenotype. I think it's high beta, let's say, is associated with bipolar. But that would be an example potentially. Maybe it would be an example of doing a test first before we just give you a drug.
It's not a reliable phenotype, though. I mean, yeah, I all respect to Jay, but it's a mid-temporal beta excess generally is what you'll see, mid-temporal lobe, like T4, typically right-sided usually, but it's not a reliable phenotype. You'll get people who have that phenomena, who have classic manic depression, if you will, classic cycling, who don't show that and instead show the phenotypes you would expect from OCD. So the phenotypes don't always track. You can't always see through the skull properly to catch the phenotypes that might represent. I think so. Yeah. I mean, it's just a little bit. And this is the risk in our field. There's lots of grad students who've like not gotten their PhDs trying to get discriminants in the EEG for certain like depression or medication response. Like it's a very weak signal across a population of variants generally when you look for these discriminants. So. I just think I think we have to be cautious hanging too much on it because it's weak. We should use it as far as we can and then stop just shy of that so that people don't think we're over-interpreting. You know. There's a lot of pushback. We get a lot of pushback in at least I do in neurofeedback. When I say things, people get very like almost frustrated. Like, no, that can't be true. Well, actually, this is what we see in the brain. So
they can help you reduce spelling mistakes.
Yeah.
There we go. What part of my brain do I need to train to reduce my spelling mistakes? I think it's related to my vision.
0102?
Depends.
Depends.
I mean, it might be
so interesting because all the networks are so tied together. If it was only that easy to just go in and work on one part and fix this thing and work on the other part and fix that thing. But everybody thinks of the 0102 as visionary.
As vision control, yeah.
Yeah. But if that part's perfectly regulated, but then when it goes from there to process through the temporal and then to the frontal, it could be the connection between the occipital and the temporal or the temporal and the frontal. So
or superior parietal. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot there. One way to nail that down, Radar, is to figure out if it only happens when you're trying to read. Does it also happen with numbers? Does it happen with other aspects of vision that are not just sitting and reading static information? Are there other places you can find it showing up where you notice it's difficult? But is it truly language bound or not? Because that's the first question. Is this a language thing? If it's spelling, could be dyslexia, or it could be visual attention, like Diane pointed out.
Could be a memory issue.
I mean, there's processing. Maybe you're flaking out halfway through a word because your speed of processing is slippery, or slow. So there's a few different ways to go after it. Looking at your QEEG, find the big resources, train the big resources, and then feel which ones actually create the shift and lean into that. So, chase the phenomena versus being a phrenologist and going after the cortex itself. Find the phenomena you experience, but model it in your brain if you can in your QEEG.
So how would you do it? You would have the cap on, and then you would be asked to spell something or do a mathematical problem and see what shows up in the raw data.
You wouldn't have to. You might be able to do that, but that wouldn't be a QEEG so much as an evoked or a phase, kind of phenomena. You might be able to do, like I've worked with folks that have dyslexia before, and you make them do the thing that really browns out their perspective, and at least in some people you'll see a phase decoupling and a huge alpha surge between frontal and posterior language areas on the left, almost like it's a brief type of aphasia kind of showing up. And other folks, I haven't seen that when doing language-based things. So I don't think a state shift in the resting endogenous ongoing EEG is that reliable. You'd have to do something with ERPs and language probes and fixed vision. It'd be a little bit tricky to probe, but I don't think you'd have to, because if it's that off, the phenotype resource of language or auditory or visual or symbol manipulation areas in the right, the sort of analog to Wernicke's in the right, Geschwin's area, these things will have quirky features. And even if it's not like someone else's quirky feature, it's a plausible resource area to go after. So you can be a little regional with your hypotheses, I think. And if you see an area that involved in Symbol manipulation, P3, P4, a little bit lower, T5, T6. Those are areas involved with symbols. And the left is more language and the right is more math, and both are used for music. But if you have a really, really weird P3 and you can never spell, start there, because that's receptive language, monitoring the language as you produce it. But if you have O1 and O2, there's nothing going on at P3 and P4. It's not the parietal management of that visual stream. Instead, it's the attention control of that, and systematically work your way through these hypotheses, Radar, until you figure out what's actually true for you. Because generally people know what's true for them, or they can feel it when it changes a little bit. So demystify it.
Is it time to talk about that hit piece, Dr. Hill?
The hit piece, there was a recent paper that came out that lots of people, I've been really surprised at how excited people are to share this across social media and say neurofeedback doesn't work. And it's being boosted more than most papers I've seen. And I'm not sure why. It's not a very good paper. It does have a very strong conclusion, but at least in the title. But then you go and dig through the paper, and even within the paper, it actually is not as straightforward as the paper says in the title. So a couple big things that I noticed were that, one, there's all kinds of research it didn't include. Like, there's all kinds of studies, tons, and it sort of have a little bit narrowed, selection criteria. And then my biggest complaint is that we don't do neurofeedback the way it's done in short little arm studies that were used in the selection criteria. And even given that, even among the very limited papers, the weak effects, this paper said no effects compared to medication, or medication's far superior, until you restrict the analysis to traditional neurofeedback protocols, and now you see an effect. And we also get an effect in speed of processing, which is a really deep resource and hard thing to change. So, like, they found effects on ADHD, they found effects on speed of processing, and they did a crappy job selecting studies, and then kind of massaged over the findings they actually found to have a clickbait title. So, there's a lot more research out there than there's referenced in this paper. But, you are not a research subject. If you do neurofeedback to your brain, person listening or watching, generally it's not done like any of those papers. It's rare that you would ever have neurofeedback done to you the way it's done in a paper to a research subject. It's not the same thing. It's, like saying people who go to the gym never get exercise. Yeah, because that gym you're researching, people sit on chairs instead of walk on treadmills. It's a sitting on chairs gym, not a walking on treadmills gym you're looking at. It's not how we do it. So, it's a little bit misleading. The broad brush is not.
I put the link in the comments section so people can check it out. And even in the hit piece, Dr. Hill, it said neurofeedback was good for what?
It still showed some impact on ADHD when you use traditional neurofeedback protocols, they call them, versus just looking at what was used in the studies. When they leaned in towards that side of things, still found an effect. And speed of processing, which is the core feature of IQ that we can actually measure in the EEG. I got somebody yelled at me on Reddit recently. I saw an academic psychology question. Hey, why isn't IQ more researched? And I was like, oh, okay, good question. I put a comment saying, actually, there's a couple of papers in neurofeedback showing some changes in IQ, and I actually tend to see a standard deviation or two of change in speed of processing, in pretty routinely. And everyone just jumped all over me. Charlatan, quack, what are you doing? And like, why are you trying to sell me stuff? And I was, and my comment was, and that might be a good area to research. Like, I was like actually answering the question. Hey, there's some interesting stuff here. I see a lot of it. Might be a good place to research. And instead of somebody saying, hey, thanks, that's interesting, it was just like dump of lots of like pseudoscientists who were like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, all right, okay.
I wonder, is that insecurity because what they're doing is not working? Like, we wouldn't be here if traditional psychology or psychopharmacology was working as well as we would like it to. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to think out, because I have noticed people love to slam dunk on neurofeedback. They absolutely do.
Yeah.
The internet in general loves to slam dunk on things. But I was in a Discord with psychology students, and you mention one word and you get slammed. Actually, meta studies say that it is invalid.
Yeah.
And then I go do my own research. Actually, most of the ones I found at that time said that there's something worthwhile
Something
here.
there. Yeah,
So-
they all say
so
there's something there. Yeah,
They
none of
hadn't
the
even-
studies are as
not like
damning as
Hudson read it.
people.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, none of the studies are as damning as people say they are
Yes.
who haven't read the studies.
Exactly.
So-
Isn't that the way it always is in the beginning before something is mainstream? You know, I think
We've been
all
in
of
the
it
beginning
has
for a
got
long time.
This has been a long time
in
Sorry.
a while, huh?
since we've been
So
born.
do we know anything about who backed this recent paper? Like
Good one.
what about the people? Where are they from and why did they pull this paper together?
I mean, this is not a new kind of finding though in our field of a weak paper coming out saying here's 4 studies we looked at with no effect. Like this happens, and it's all the same reason is that small n's, short studies, one intervention, weak blinding or no blinding. You know, like it's all the same problems. And so, you know, we just have to not let the story be framed for us that this is actually the answer. It's like, well, no, actually, that's one very narrow perspective and it's missing most of the research. What we really need is a little bit of counter research, you know, doing some multi-arm studies that are double blind, showing effects. I mean, it's really easy. It's really, really easy to show in the brain in real time the loop of neurofeedback existing as a signature of resonance as the brain reacts to the outside information. You can see it in an ERSP. It's not that hard to visualize. And doesn't show up when you blind the signal of neurofeedback. There's no ERSP that shows up, no ERD, event-related desynchronization that shows up if you blind the signal, if the beeps are not contingent on the person's EEG. Not that hard. But nobody owns neurofeedback. That's another big thing. The research is all weak because it's some grad student doing a little 20-student study or some psychologist doing it after hours with their particular population of convenience that's poorly selected. It's not, there's no really good research. And, you know, at this point to do a sort of a high-level study, you really sort of need like NIH, NIMH study. You need like $5 million to $10 million to do a real traditional gold level study the way drug companies do. And that's really what would be needed to get over that insurance hump. And who owns neurofeedback sufficiently to invest $5 million into it or $10 million? You know, who's going to fund that particular research? So we end up with weak studies and hit pieces. And yet, if you look below the clickbait, it's not that damning, actually. So I don't know, people want to believe what they want to believe, but I think that academic psychology landscape is full of pseudo academics as well. It's not like we have the highest caliber thinkers necessarily on a internet forum. And there's lots of people who just, why they're there is just to poo-poo things and to, you know, get mad at and to be intellectuals and to be intellectually superior. So that happens on the internet from what I understand. You know, so
Not at all.
Yeah.
So the processing, so that's a plus. So if you have a processing issue, what does that mean to a mom and dad when their kid?
Wow.
Well, I mean, reading faster, being smarter. The biggest correlate to speed of processing is IQ in terms of like, you know, common language. But it also affects like how fast a kid reads or how much they want to read. Someone's got a slow processing speed. They absorb information slowly. They listen to you slowly. They think slowly. And you speed that up and they get smarter. Their inspection time, their reaction time, their speech, their reading gets more fluid, more fluent. My perspective looking at the shape of the bell curves in all the WISC, the WAIS, all the classic, the Stanford Binet, the shape of the bell curve there and the shape of the bell curve with alpha speed, peak alpha speed with eyes closed are very similar and the correlation's pretty high. If you double the outlier on an alpha speed, you land on IQ, is my take on it. So if you're a standard, and this only works if someone's alpha speed is not thrown off. And the way you can tell is if your alpha speed is synchronous within the hemisphere, left hemisphere typically, it's synchronous. If it's the same speed roughly, there's a front to back axis. But if you have roughly the same speed, it's not all over the place, which is you're really tired generally, and you aren't sleeping well or other things are off. But if the synchronous speed, that's your speed of processing. And if you double that statistic, that Z-score, it's roughly where you land on an IQ test Z-score. So if it's one standard deviation above average in alpha speed, that's 2 standard deviations of IQ, i.e. genius. That's the genius threshold, 130. So that's what you'll see in the alpha. People going from below average, and half, 2/3 a standard deviation below average, draggy, to speeding up their brain to a full standard deviation above average sometimes, in a comfortable way, not being pushed by it, but the machine running so fast that things feel smooth and clear and calm inside. So that's what we see in speed of processing.
So if neurofeedback isn't good for ADHD, according to this paper, what is it good for that we can use this paper that says, hey, well, look at the resources that I have here?
I mean, I have a hard time, believing it's not good when I see people posting about my neuropsychologist using it, my psychiatrist using it, my neurologist using it. Like, if it's not good, then why are all the people doing it so committed to using it? We're not making tons of money. You could make much more money being a therapist than doing neurofeedback. Yeah. Honestly, or a prescriber make a lot more money as a doctor, actual doing medicine or fee for service individual therapy than you can make during neurofeedback. So why are we doing it? Why are we spending all this thousands of dollars on equipment and learning how the brain works if it doesn't work, So like where's the motivation, for us to fake it? Like I'm having a hard time understanding why people are so insistent on poking at it when it I have noticed another inflection there, Pete. I've noticed people with ADHD, a couple of my friends, I was like, oh, you can just look at your brain, you can figure your ADHD out, you might change it, and they got mad. And it wasn't that they didn't think I was right or that it was possible. They believed me. They got really mad because the idea that they've been walking around for 20 years without support and there was something there was extremely frustrating. And there was a lot of resistance to the idea initially because like, what you can, oh yeah. And went through lots of like the stages of grief, almost pushing back against the idea and like, well, wait a minute, I want to see my brain. So learn your brain. That's my roundabout way of saying everyone should do a QEEG.
Mopey wants to know what my EEG looks like.
Your EEG? Nice.
What do brains of polymaths and geniuses look like on a QEEG?
They're fast.
A lot of gamma? A lot of gamma?
Nah.
No?
You can't really tell in a QEEG.
All right, never mind.
Fast alpha. The polymath thing's interesting. That's really somebody who's multiply skilled. I mapped the language guy, Jama on YouTube, the Ari Witten. I forget his last name, but a guy named Ari, who's the language guy on YouTube from New York City, who learns languages and walks into random villages where there's a dead language and starts speaking it to people. And his brain was interesting. He saw lots of high power. You can go to YouTube and watch me review his brain if you want on his channel. And we walked through his
link right here.
Well, people put a link right there to Jama's channel. And you saw lots of high powered, beta, and lots of fast alpha, very classic. There's sort of a signature of brains I've been seeing a lot of. Like I'll see 5 or 10 a week, new ones looking at brain maps. And I've been calling it the gifted poet or the tortured poet, depending on if it's working for somebody or not. And it's this activation of the cingulates, both of them usually, plus behind the right ear, the right temporal parietal junction, and then usually both of the central areas for executive function things. So you have the classic anxiety, the plus sign, anxiety front to back, executive and sleep left to right, and then behind the right ear, social and sensory systems a bit flooded. And these are people that have all the thoughts and all the ideas and all the sensitivity and all the power with which to catastrophize and feel the world's pain. And you end up with this like brilliant but anxious kind of ADHD person. It's a very particular phenotype, cluster of phenotypes that is not a problem. It's not a disease process. It's a human. It's a normal variant of human, but it's kind of like seeing a left-handed person or something else. It's a specific flavor that we get in some subset of humans.
Anthony, I have missed you, my friend. What has been going on in your group that has thousands of people in it? Called what?
Thank you. You're repping. It's Science and Technology, but on
Facebook.
But I can't immediately think. Did see those studies that you sent out. I didn't prepare as I should, but I'll open it up to if somebody else has topics for while I'm looking.
Well, while you're noodling that, and I don't see any other questions here. And I warned all the people that showed up. They don't ask the question. That means Pete will. Dr. Andrew, I'm going to go back to this. Another weekend with my Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
And I just want to know, and I'm getting there, getting very close. Can I have my own little amplifier with my Raspberry Pi just picking up one signal on the brain? Is it possible to pick up that signal without any interference?
3 wires and a Raspberry Pi? Sure, you can make an amplifier to that if you have the right circuit. There's differential amps using sound cards, old ones. You take a sound card, run it backwards, and instead of an amplifier, it becomes a receiver. And you can use adapters, and you hook a couple wires with the head, and you can use an old sound card with a Linux driver hack to turn it into an EEG amplifier. And it's very basic technology, and I think that's what the guys who did the OpenBCI ganglion boards or OpenEEG ganglion boards actually may have modeled their system after initially before they changed it. And so it's very low cost hardware to create a differential amplifier circuit, like a couple dollars per circuit. And, some module to plug into the Raspberry Pi. All those secondary products out there, there's Raspberry Pi hats that have built-in power over internet and networking and storage and things, right on top. Some of those have external GPU plugins as well. So you could have a little AI brain sitting there on your Raspberry Pi running on a giant NVIDIA GPU sitting under it with a little EEG hat pulling in data off your head, learning from you all day long if you wanted to.
Okay, seriously, what are you talking about, Raspberry Pi?
It's a little microcomputer that's super cheap and runs Linux and is used for basic things like a firewall for your house or a little project like a little micro EEG amplifier or something. You can make those in Raspberry Pis.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's like a little tiny device.
I'm I'm picturing when people used to make the batteries with a potato, and I'm like, what are you talking about?
It's a little bit more sophisticated, but yeah.
But it is so cheap, and it is getting so easy to code now. Now you have the Chinese coming in with their AI. If you can have Grok, you can have DeepSeek, and you have GPT, all 3 windows open up at the same time, run the code through each, and come up with a process. I mean, I'm tripping over back. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, guys, but I'm backdooring into making my own little system here. And if I can do it, there's a lot of hardware that's out there for anybody that just wants to get started with something. I'm trying to just sell that, hey, you know what? Pick up one signal and do it in various parts of the brain to come up with some type of raw data, Dr. Andrew. How would you do that?
No, sorry. For assessments, you need simultaneous channels to get phase relationships and connectivity, and you need regional data. No, I'm sorry. You can't.
How many sensors would I need?
19.
19. So you full 19.
Plus your ears. If you want to do it. The reason is because we have 100.5 years of EEG that has used a 19-channel grid on the head to do its assessments. We don't have references for filtering, for averaging, for spatial distribution in a different montage or different set of grids. So, you can do individual signals. You can do new data, new analyses off of 1 channel, 2 channels. You can train on 1 channel. But you can't assess without matching your assessment recording to the landscape of data you're trying to think about. And that requires quote unquote dense array EEG or sleep grid, 19-channel EEG. Sorry, Pete. But you can buy 19-channel EEG ganglion, cheap boards for $100 these days. Boards are really, really cheap. There's lots of manufacturers starting to make these little cheap transistor boards that will do this kind of stuff. So the bar's coming down. The harder part is not rolling your own. Like you could roll your own and do neurofeedback. I could probably spend time rolling my own and do some neurofeedback because we know how to do neurofeedback. The hard part is lots of people who have lots of exciting ideas and they're geeky and they have ADHD are like, I'm going to build my own EEG and fix my brain. And yeah, they probably could build the machine. That's not the hard part. The hard part of neurofeedback is not getting EEG onto the screen. And it's what do you do with it? There's a whole process there. And that's not about, can I build a $100 device and stick wires to my head? Kettlebells work just as well as a Nautilus machine. What you do with stuff matters.
Radar took the bait.
Yeah.
How do you train to up peak alpha at PZ without increasing stress anxiety, since the cingulates are sensitive to being activated?
Why is it not fast enough? That's my first question.
Yeah, radar.
No, I mean, like, yeah, it's fine to want it faster, but is there something in the way of it? Is there another frequency? Is there extra theta there? Is there a, fast beta spindle that's suppressing the alpha from speeding up? Is your sleep dysregulated, your sleep maintenance? Is there some reason it's draggy? Or are you just like trying to overclock the machine? Because it can be hard to overclock if you're already running pretty fast and you're already as fast as you might want to run. It can be hard to push the alpha up just arbitrarily. It doesn't love to be pushed on sometimes.
No, and
All right,
faster,
well-
more alpha isn't always better. So,
Yeah.
Okay, while he's noodling on that, Guy steps forward and says, can motor movement be increased with neurofeedback?
I'm not
hand-eye
sure what you mean about motor movement.
Guy?
Hand-eye
Hand-eye-
coordination, sure. Yeah, I work with a lot of athletes who get better, more fine-grained control.
yes.
I have some experience myself with music, a lot of rhythm, West African rhythm. I've done a bunch of work in that area of music, and it requires perceiving time really, really carefully, really tightly. And I find when I do a lot of neurofeedback, I can perceive time more finely grained. And I've heard athletes say similar things when they do neurofeedback. They can decide a lot more when to release the bat or the pitch or whatever it is. So yeah, SMR would be a big piece of it, radar. I would agree. Definitely one of the protocols that might be useful. Now remember, there's no protocol for anything. Yes, it might work if your brain needs it, but for somebody else, train that CZ-SMR up, and you might create abreactions and difficulties in sleep or a trauma response or something else. So
What do you do for that kind of patient? I think I heard you refer to that last time, that like 5% may not respond well to SMR.
yeah, or more.
Okay.
But go slow enough with your SMR to find that out, and use the ways in which SMR flexes to understand how for that person it's not regulating well, and then stop doing SMR and fix that thing. So if you do SMR and someone gets abreactions with anxiety, and their brain has a lot of beta on the right side already, or maybe posterior, let's say, parietal beta, which doesn't usually get in the way of central strip, but it can. You go, oh wow, this person's beta is super touchy. I guess we better stop doing SMR and do some midline training, some PZA training, some P4. Let's stop for a second because that was too touchy. But generally, even if you're activated and anxious and burnt, you can get away with training SMR if you tune it to their frequency. One of my big tricks is undershooting someone's SMR just a tiny bit. If they're activated, you can kind of soothe them, and CZ is great for that. But it can be really hard. So there's a certain percentage of people for whom you don't have. SMR doesn't need to be done for everyone. You don't have to do it necessarily. I like to do it. It works for so many things. I think of SMR training as the deadlift of neurofeedback. It's just it's the compound exercise that just kind of works on everything at once. In some ways.
Would you ever remove it
from someone's protocol set? Sure, I've done that a few times.
Inhibit it. Yeah.
Inhibit medium frequency beta, low teens beta on the motor strip? Probably not. No. Okay. I'd be a little afraid of causing some problem by doing that. Like a seizure. There's no good reason to think you would necessarily, but humans are always, balanced at the edge of criticality. We're always falling between, total order, which is death, and total chaos, which is death. We're balanced in between those two. And human brains, the ability to the ability to walk requires the ability to almost fall down and then not. And the ability to think requires the ability to almost go into a seizure and then not. So we're always tamping down the chaos and preventing it from becoming too organized or too chaotic. And I'd be a little concerned about dropping the inhibitory tone of the central strip and allowing that process to run a little bit rampant. There's a lot of seizure activity between the C and T sites. And so, wouldn't want to release that essentially to not be inhibited by beta or to disrupt sleep. a lot of sleep and vigilance and attention. So and you'll see, here's the thing, to answer your question, probably more importantly, you'll see on a QEEG, somebody has excess beta on the C areas.
Mm-hmm.
You still generally want to reward the beta.
Wow. Okay. Huh.
That answers your question, actually, right there. It's not about the hotspotology, as Pasquale Marquis would call it. It's this, what's happening in the resource. Is it a compensatory excess of beta, perhaps? If it's a sleep maintenance issue, you may see poor beta tone under C3. Usually you do. 10%, 20% of the time, when there's a sleep maintenance issue, you actually see excess beta under C3 instead. Same training protocol. Bring up the vigilance tone, the left side, and it relaxes or it comes up, either way. So it's more about what tissue are we working with, what is its job, what is its failure mode in now, and how do we get it out of this failure mode or stretch it or encourage it. And sometimes it's a linear push away from the direction it's sticking out. Sometimes it's not. It's the other direction, like that beta or like alpha rebound training, Seaburn's stuff, the alpha double down stuff, where you get this alpha rebound. Sometimes it's the opposite. And sometimes it's moving things out of the way and letting a brainwave climb. That's what we often have to do for alpha, right? We have to sort of not train the alpha, but get stuff out of its way. So yeah, I would never inhibit SMR generally.
Those individuals, so the individuals I know that they cannot train SMR, Jay actually saw some extra SMR, in his words, in their EGs. But if they train SMR, either their anxiety gets worse, their sleep gets worse, or both. Or both.
It's compensatory. It's the brain like trying to grab stuff.
And that's and so those people just they have lack of success with all the training. They really can't train. And so I'm trying to figure out how to help them. Simultaneous, there's a study, and they all have T6 alpha, and there's at least a couple papers out there that say that people with PTSD often have more SMR, and what's lacking is their REM sleep. So I don't know, and I haven't met a clinician who can treat these people either. A few people have tried, and they're familiar with Jay's techniques.
Share an EDF file or two with me if you could.
Okay, if I can get a hold of their EDFs again, I will. It's been like a year.
Or NeuroGuide. What I would probably want to do is think about really old school arousal model stuff first.
Yeah.
Wonder if there are excesses in the 0 to 3 hertz range at CZ. Because if someone's getting ab reactions from SMR, old trauma-informed therapist arousal model stuff would say there could be an excess of stuff in the below 3 hertz, almost like early memory, early trauma, developmental trauma stuff. That was one of the early theories around it that hasn't been well talked about since. We talked about the periaqueductal gray and the amygdala, and Mr. Cingulate, but there was for a while a big talk about the blob of delta that hangs out in low frequency there. So one, I might add a 0 to 3 inhibit on an SMR and leave everything else alone. Inhibit the go 2 to 7. And I've done a lot of work with autism and developmental populations who are heavily over aroused, sensorially, who have a right strong overactivation usually. And so those kids do not tolerate SMR training classically. You have to do a bunch of stuff to get to SMR training, or you tune it to their frequency, or you mix it with working on the other things at the same time. So that population often does a 10 to 13 hertz alpha reward at T6, T4, P4 to soothe that system. If it's underactive but cramping up in high gear, you soften like 18 to 32 inhibits. You bring up the fast alpha, and remember, SMR is kind of like alpha. So you're kind of working in that same landscape. So you end up doing with this developmental population that faster alpha back there, and then the SMR works fine after that in the same session often. So
wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
You can use SMR as a piecemeal protocol to gently do something without doing a lot of it if somebody's also overreacting or having a strong response to it too. So
okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah.
To answer Radar's question, what percentage of EEG at CZ should be SMR? Do you have an actual percentage?
I don't believe in the percentage of. I don't believe in that. That all comes from one person's set of data, and they have some perspective on it. And, giant grain of salt when you see raw numbers. treated. Even things as simple as the theta beta ratio numbers. Don't believe those. Like, when someone says, "Oh, your theta beta ratio should be a 6." If it's above a 7, you have ADHD. No. It depends on a lot of factors. Maybe your skull's thin. Maybe you're young. Maybe, you're drunk. I don't know. But like, there's lots of factors that affect the gross numbers, and we have to be cautious. If you don't have sufficient SMR at CZ, you'll have tension in your body. You won't fall asleep very well. You won't stay asleep very well. And if it's really bad, you might have seizures or chronic pain. If none of those things apply to you, you got plenty of CZ, SMR, and you can train it, but you don't have to worry about, is it sufficient?
Would T3, T4 help stabilize these sensitive people? The Optimers are pretty good at helping sensitive people.
It might, maybe, perhaps.
No, it depends.
Depends. It's
See?
my favorite answer. One of my clients laughs because he thinks it's my Buddhist way of being like non-committal, non-attached to the outcome. Oh, maybe, yeah, could be. Let's see.
I find T3,
Sure.
T4 to be sensitive for people. And with the SMR and the cases that don't respond as well, there's very few of them. If you just bump the frequency down, I mean, we're saying SMR. And what are we talking about? Are you talking about 13 to 15 hertz frequency? But it's really a morphology of the wave. It's not 13 to 15 hertz frequency. We just say it's that because that's the average. Right. But some people, if you bump it down to like 12 to 14 and train that, they respond really well. So that might be something to try if you haven't done that yet, instead of just the 13 to 15.
And Jay talks about SMR being from like 9 up to like 18 or something, as the bottom edge. Yeah. It can be wide.
Very wide.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, T3, T4, Diane, I agree. It can be a little bit touchy. I'm a little bit cautious going after the mid-temporals.
I am too. Yeah.
So yes, radar, they might, but that's a particular population. Once you're sensitive, there's got to be a reason why. And it might be a developmental reason. It might be a trauma reason. It might be deep fatigue or injury. It might be that bipolar thing we talked about at the beginning of the show today, where there's a medial temporal instability that shows up. But once the temporal lobes are suffering hard, they're a little bit tricky to train, and they tend to be like annoying, or annoyed at you for stretching them. So
yeah, it's one of the last areas I like to train.
So yeah, it's a little tricky. It's complex. It's complicated. Sorry.
It's complicated.
Get a brain map. I'll tell you about you, and then it's simpler. One person's simpler than general answers. Sorry.
Yeah, it depends.
So Valentine's Day is coming up. What's going on in the brain for the people with the Valentines and without?
Those of us feeling blissfully unattached.
Unattached.
We're getting less oxytocin and less vasopressin, less neurohormone going on, sadly. But
celebrating being blissfully unattached.
But our circadian rhythms are left intact because we're not having to deal with other partners
much
snoring
less stress.
and stealing the covers and exactly stressing us out. So
okay, all right. So Dr. Hill, you have a pretty good business remote, don't you?
We do, yeah. I work mostly remote. We do have a bunch of offices in the U.S. and overseas, but 80% of our clients or so never see our offices, and we do remote brain mapping and remote sort of eager, focused phenotype training, if you will, and do a few months of remote neurofeedback typically, yeah.
And where do we send people?
Come check us out at peakbraininstitute.com, or if you're on socials, you can check us out at Peak Brain LA, which is most of our social presence. And come check me out at youtube.com/Dr. Hill, DRHILL. Every Monday, I do a live stream Monday evening and talk about some brain and neurofeedback topic.
And Dr. Hill fought off the flames with a garden hose.
I did not, actually. I was not heroic. I did not leave my apartment. I thought about it. I got to say, the worst part, besides watching the news and wondering if I was going to have to do something, the worst part was twice when somebody by mistake triggered LA County-wide evacuation notices. You heard about that? That happened twice. So it's 10 p.m. and suddenly my phone's
going off. The same day, right?
Oh, I thought I was going to be fine. I guess I better start packing a bag now and where's my cat carrier?
Gosh.
So I'm like for 15 minutes, my heart's pounding and I'm rushing around being like, I think I have all the stuff. And then the all clear came through, mistake. I'm like, okay. And then the next day it happened again. And I'm like, oh, this has to be a mistake again because there's no fire nearby. And so it happened twice. That was the mildly stressful part. But no, LA is still dealing with a lot. It's going to be a while before stuff even starts. Just as a mildly ironic aside, or maybe, terrible aside, there's a property in LA today that was closed on. It was a burnt out lot closed on for $550,000. First property bought off of that big Palisades swath that was burned out. Somebody went and bought a lot for over $500,000, which is a charred husk of quarter acre, So
and the guy should be lucky that he was able to buy it because I heard they were putting some restrictions.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of change here in LA. I'm hoping what this leads to is, we're probably going to have a huge increase in cost of building infrastructure in the U.S. It sounds like over the next couple of years. So I'm hoping what this leads to is an acceleration of, affordable housing, alternative housing. We're starting to see in California a lot more use of alternative methods that are not wood, things that are like alternative versions of concrete, essentially. So I'm hoping that it's not a brain topic, sorry, but I'm hoping this crisis leads to us going, okay, let's engineer our way out of the problem, countrywide of really poor access to housing. And if it's being forced upon, has been, forced upon what is usually a fairly wealthy and well-to-do, part of the country, I have a hunch that the need is so big that maybe we'll finally put some, focus and money onto building 20,000 houses in Los Angeles, like is needed. And that will have follow-on effect of cheaper housing and more plentiful, easily, established housing in the country. A smart city.
And get fire insurance.
Maybe a smart city.
Thank Costo. Welcome to the party again. Where can we send people to?
Hey, so.
And why would we send them there?
Yeah.
For remote training as well. And for education.
I'm really excited because we have 27 opening, maybe 26. There might be one taken today, but we are expanding across the country, opening new locations. And so we're going for 27 spots. Like I said, maybe one's taken today. And we're looking for thriving practices that are open to regulating brains. And we're going to come in, do all the heavy lifting, set up shop, and provide the services for you. So Symmetry Neuropathway Training is the name of our company, and it's symmetryneuropt.com. So just click on the website, schedule a call, and we can have a chat, see if you qualify as one of the locations.
And then thank you to Radar, Mobeat, Radar Guy, our crew that always shows up. Appreciate you guys coming up and asking some questions so I don't have to. I will hold on to my Raspberry Pi last question for next week, Dr. Hill.
All right.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up so I know what you're talking about now.
You're going to have to bring show and tell, Pete, so people can,
I will show it if I can. I'm very close, Dr. Hill.
I want to see your brain streaming off our little Raspberry Pi. That's what I want to see.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
I'll show you. Wait, hold on. One more. We got a heart. Hey, Moby.
Right, guys.
I choose you. Dr. Hill, Diane, see you later.
Yeah.